Hey, this is Joe Hubbard from JoeHubbardBasedVideos.com coming at you today with another lesson. And this is the third lesson in my jazz improvisation course, Creating Jazz Lines. This particular lesson is on the major 7th chord, so with that in mind, grab your bass and let's get started. Before we move on, it's important to discuss a few helpful practicing tips. To attain the technical mastery that we're looking to do, what I want you to do is use these exercises that we're working on in this course as the first things that you practice every day. What I also want you to do is practice through different cycles. Start with the cycle of fourths and fifths. This is where you go to C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, B, E, A, D, and G. This will improve your comprehension of root movement in standard harmonic progressions. But after that, start experimenting with going through the cycle of minor thirds, major seconds, minor seconds, tritones, etc. This is the way forward because it starts to enable you to attack and get into different chords from different intervallic cycles. Very important to do. The other thing is, don't spend too much time practicing on what comes easy. Concentrate on what is difficult first and what is easy last. When going through the initial stages of learning any of these exercises, don't use a metronome. The reason is based on the premise that the metronome creates and induces a performance situation. Therefore, vital mistakes are often left uncorrected. The metronome should only be introduced once you have a firm grasp of each exercise. All exercises should be memorized. Make sure to investigate the commonalities between the chord types to help facilitate this process. Always build from slow to fast, but in order for these exercises to become functional, they need to eventually be played fast. The most common harmonic function for the major 7th chord is acting as a 1 major 7th or the tonic of the key. Ultimately, all the tones heard in the Western music system lead us back to the tonic or the 1 chord. So far, we have studied exercises that outline the 2 minor 7, which is the subdominant, leading us to the 5-7, which is the dominant chord, which then ultimately resolves to the 1 major 7th or the tonic. This creates a sense of finality. This chord progression is the most used harmonic major cadence in the Western music system and therefore needs to be understood in order for us to understand how to create music. Now, this is otherwise known as the 2-5-1 progression, which we've looked at extensively within our functional harmony course. So what we want to do in progressing with this particular lesson is start by reviewing the major 7th 2-octave arpeggio. And then we want to do that across the 4 strings so we can understand the spatial relationship of our instrument. So by doing that, we've got this fingering. I know this is a review. Most of you should know this already, but this is a good way to start your practice off so you can just hear the sound of that 1 major 7. Okay, get this down, go practice this, come back, and we're going to start lesson 3. Okay, so by now we should have a working familiarity with the formula for this fragmented arpeggio exercise, and this should be fully understood. So by applying this idea to the broken arpeggio exercise number 1 over the major 7th, we're going to have this: root 3, 5, 3, 5, 7, 5, 7, root, 7, root, 3, 5, and then 3, 5, 7. If I play that ascending and descending, I'm going to have this. Remember, it's important to count. So again, by counting, you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I then find that I need to do the rhythmic subdivisions of the 16s to enunciate those syllables to help me feel that a little bit better, then I'll do it that way. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1, 2, 3, 4. And then again, by now you should really be getting this in 16s, but we can still play it in triplets to lead us to the 16s, and this is an important concept. So, you know, if you want to scale it back down just because of a different fingering, whatever, you know, sometimes the limitation of something can help you get somewhere. So we go 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4. So practice these, get these down. Remember again, that challenge is you're doing everything ascending, both ascending and descending back down the fretboard. Go practice, come back, and we'll do the next one. Over the broken arpeggio exercise number 2 with the major 7th is as follows. We've got 5, 3, root, 7, 5, 3, root, 7, 5, 3, root, 7, 5, 3, root, and then 7, 5, 3, and then playing that in succession. I've got to emphasize the importance of counting. Make sure that you're counting this in 16s, either using the pulse or the rhythmic subdivision to enable you to create this polyrhythmic feel, 3 against 4. So we've got this 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I could also do it with the subdivision, so I go 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a... Again with the triplets, I've got 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4. The diatonic approach from above technique. So what we do is we take the diatonic note from the scale, and the scale that we're going to be using is the major scale. That's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then back to 1. It's not the only scale we can use over a major 7th chord, but it's the one we're going to deal with today. So the idea is that we have our 3-note groupings. We want the diatonic note to approach the first note in each 3-note group. So our first 3-note group is going to be root 3, 5. So the diatonic approach from above is going to be the D or the 2nd of the scale. So I go scale degree 2, then the root, the 3, and then the 5. Into the next 3-note group, which starts with 3 and goes 3, 5, 7, I'm going to approach that by scale degree 4. So here I've got this pattern. So far we've got this. And then following along with that formula, scale tone 6 is going to approach into the 5. So I go 5, 7, 1. Okay, and then what happens from there is the scale tone 1 is going to approach the 7, and then I'm back to the beginning of it an octave above. So approaching the root is going to be the second degree of the scale, and then approaching the third is going to be the fourth. So now I have this. So this is the kind of idea that we're looking to get, this sort of sound. And as far as fingering, there's a few different ways that you can do that. I could do it like this. Shift here. Maybe that sets me up a little better when I kind of come back and approach it like that. So the main idea is with some of the fingerings, you might alter slightly, but stick to the main skeleton of what I'm trying to do here, at least in the beginning, just to get it under your fingers. Once you've got it under your fingers, explore, explore, explore. The more variety, the better. The more it becomes a sound issue than a finger pattern. But to get started, it's kind of important to do it within this way. Again, what we're trying to do is be aware and be able to outline that spatial relationship of your instrument going in that horizontal fashion. So get this down, practice this, come back, and we'll move on to the second one. That we're going to take a look at is the chromatic approach note from below. All the same rules apply as previously applied to the minor 7th and the dominant 7th chord types. What we want to take a look at is how we're actually doing this. We're approaching each one of those 3-note descending groups with a chromatic approach note from below, and that approach note is going into the first note. So if we look at the 3-note descending pattern, we've got the 5, 3, and the root. In the case of being in C, this is going to be G, E, and C. And I'm approaching from below the 5th, coming up, then back down. It gives me that nice angular chromatic 4-note sequential pattern. The next one is going to be going into the 7. So I'm here, going into this. And fingering wise, that's probably a pretty good thing to do, because from here to skip with that middle finger will always clip that root note a little bit short when moving to that next pattern. So sometimes we have to compromise and come up with an alternative, and that's a pretty good one, okay? So here I have the chromatic approach note into the root, okay? Again, this is a good example of how that approach note was there, but when I go back down, it's a chord tone, okay? Chromatic approach from below the 3rd, below the 5th, and then below the 7th. We should really be getting used to these formulas now. This really should, we've been doing the same thing over all the different chords, so by now you should really be getting this under your fingers and really getting the sound of this into your head. So I want you to work on these. I'm going to play this over this drone, and I encourage you to create your own drones and do this. We'll then, wrap this up and start putting this together by mixing different ideas. combine some of these ideas, and as we did with the previous chord types, we're going to combine the diatonic approach note from above exercise with the chromatic approach note from below exercise. So what I'm going to do is when I ascend, I'm going to play this diatonic approach note from above. And then when I'm descending, I'm going to play the chromatic from below. So we get this nice smooth integration between these two ideas, and this works very well. You'll hear these exact ideas in different people's improvisations, jazz guys, that sound very, very cool. You can also apply all of this stuff to any genre. Don't be mistaken that this is just a jazz thing. This can be applied to anything that you play. Anthony Jackson uses a lot of these ideas on a bunch of pop records. You know, if you think about these diatonic approaches, these work really well if you're maybe playing something a little bit more inside harmonically or inside musically. The chromatic approaches bring out that little bit more angularity, but saying that, analyze a bunch of James Jamison stuff. It's riddled with chromaticism from beginning to end. And I'm talking about all the cool stuff that he played that, you know, people revere him for through history as being one of the pioneers of the electric bass. So I really, really encourage you to study those things, because a lot of guys look at this and say, well, it's a jazz thing, I'm playing mostly pop and rock and I can't use the majority of it. You're absolutely wrong. You can use all of this stuff. The only thing that's holding you back is your own imagination. Wraps up today's lesson. But before we go, let's take a look at what we've learned. In today's lesson, we've learned the importance of focusing on chord tones versus scale tones. We've also learned useful practice tips to make the learning process easier. We talked about how to embellish the major seventh chord tones both melodically and rhythmically. We also looked at how to create ready-to-use, straight-out-of-the-box lines that you can use immediately, applying this to both your bass lines and solos over a major seventh chord. We've also learned how to practice these lines effectively over chord tone pad drums. As always, practice smart, work hard, and play creatively. I'll be checking in with you next week for Lesson 4, so until then, take care.